They thought she was just another contractor. Quiet, competent, nothing more than a pair of hands hired to keep old equipment limping along. That's what the lieutenant said one night over coffee, loud enough for half the comms room to hear, his voice dripping with the easy dismissal of someone convinced they already know your story. Lena Ortiz didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She simply kept working, tightening a cable inside a console that hadn't been opened in years. But if you agree that some people carry histories far too heavy to be seen at first glance, like and subscribe, because this is the story of the moment the past refused to stay buried. The day began in the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of burnt dust rising from overworked fans, the kind of stale air you only find in facilities forgotten by modernization. The communications wing of Fort Vance sat in the corner of the base like an old dog no one had the heart to put down, still useful enough to keep around, but never given more than the bare minimum of attention. Lena arrived as she always did, early, with her toolbox slung over one shoulder and a battered thermos in her hand, hair pulled back tight, her coveralls rolled at the sleeves. She nodded at the duty desk clerk, who barely looked up, too busy scrolling through his phone. To most here, Lena was furniture, unmoving, unimportant, always in the background. She was in her late 20s, but somehow already carried the unhurried patience of someone much older, someone who knew that attention was rarely worth chasing. Today's job was the same as yesterday's. Recalibrate the main command console that fed into the encrypted uplink, a machine older than most of the soldiers in the room, prone to freezing at the worst possible times. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. While she pulled off the panel and started cleaning the dust-choked connectors, Lieutenant Mark Barrett leaned against the wall, nursing a paper cup of coffee and an audience of 2 junior operators. "Careful, Ortiz," he called out, smirking. "If you fix that thing too well, we might actually expect you to start talking to people." The operators chuckled, not cruelly, just following the easy current of Barrett's confidence. Lena didn't respond. She never did. She had learned long ago that silence unsettled people more than any comeback could. She unscrewed another bracket, her fingertips brushing a thin film of grime off a bundle of wires, when she saw it. A faint, stuttering flicker on the diagnostic display. It was nothing anyone else would notice. Most would blame it on the machine's age. But she knew better. The flicker was in a specific rhythm, a cascade of code buried so deep it wasn't meant to be visible at all. She recognized the pattern instantly, though she hadn't seen it in years, hadn't thought about it since the day she walked away from a life she swore she'd never touch again. She hid her reaction, reaching casually for a grounding strap, making sure no one else caught the change in her breathing. Across the room, Barrett was telling a story about a real tech problem from his last posting, the kind that involved beers afterward, not solder fumes. He didn't notice the way Lena's hand slowed, the way her eyes stayed locked on that flicker like it was speaking to her in a language the rest of them had forgotten existed. The truth was, it was. Once, long ago, that flicker had been her world. A signature she had crafted, hidden inside layers of encryption so deep, even the people who used it didn't fully understand it. It wasn't just code, it was identity. A name without letters. A shadow without shape. And here it was, pulsing faintly in a machine nobody cared about, in a base nobody watched too closely. She pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to dig deeper right then and there. Not yet. Not with Barrett looming over her like a bored vulture. She finished the cleaning, replaced the panel, and ran a surface-level systems check, making it look as routine as possible. Barrett glanced at the display. "Huh, guess you didn't break it. Good work, Ortiz." He meant it as a joke, but she just gathered her tools and moved on to the next console, her mind already running at full speed. That night, long after the others had left and the room had gone still, Lena came back. The hum of the servers filled the silence like an old, familiar song. She sat at the console, fingers hovering over the keyboard, her breath steadying as she called up the hidden diagnostic layer. The flicker was still there. This time, she followed it, threading through the code like tracing a scar with her fingertips, every twist and loop leading her deeper until she reached the trigger point. The moment she touched it, the entire console screen blinked black. For 3 long seconds, nothing. Then, in a voice she hadn't heard in almost a decade, the system spoke. "Welcome back, Saber Shadow." Lena froze. The name hit like a physical blow, every syllable dragging up memories she'd locked away so tightly they might as well have belonged to someone else. Nights in windowless rooms, missions no one admitted existed, the sound of typing that decided fates half a world away. She stared at the glowing words, her reflection faint in the screen's glass. Behind her, the base was silent, oblivious. But she knew that somewhere, something had just stirred. Saber Shadow was supposed to be dead, erased, deleted, buried in a classified file that would never see daylight. And yet, here it was, calling her home. The next morning began like any other, with the chatter of keyboards and the smell of burnt coffee drifting through the comm's wing. But for Lena Ortiz, every sound felt amplified, every movement laced with a subtle pressure she couldn't name yet. She sat at her usual station, the console's dark screen staring back at her like an unblinking eye, her fingers itching to reconnect, to see if the words from the night before had been a dream. She didn't have long to wonder. At exactly 0913, during a routine weather alert drill, the entire comms system locked up, every monitor freezing midline, every transmission feed cutting to static. Panic rippled through the operators. Lieutenant Barrett barked orders over the chaos, his voice rising with each second the system remained unresponsive. "Reboot. Run the diagnostic. Now," one tech shouted. But the reboot failed, the diagnostic stalled, and suddenly every pair of eyes in the room was searching for someone who knew what to do. Lena didn't wait for permission. She slid into the operator's chair, her hands moving with a certainty that didn't match the quiet role she'd played for months. Barrett stepped forward, ready to stop her, but something in her expression froze him in place. It wasn't defiance, exactly, but focus, razor-sharp and absolute. She bypassed the standard restart sequence, drilling straight into the encrypted sublayer she had touched the night before, her keystrokes fluid and unhesitating. The static vanished, the uplink reconnected, and then it happened again, the voice, clear and calm, broadcasting through every speaker in the room. "Welcome back, Saber Shadow." Conversations died mid-word. Barrett turned slowly toward her, his smirk slipping, replaced by a flicker of confusion. The name hung in the air like a siren only a few could truly hear, and among those few, the reaction was instant. Captain Yates, the base commander, stepped out of his glass-walled office, his face taut, scanning the room until his eyes locked on Lena. "Everyone out," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Barrett laughed nervously. "Sir, it's just some glitch," I set out. The operators scattered, Barrett trailing behind, muttering something under his breath. But even he didn't miss the weight in Yates's voice. The door closed, and suddenly it was just Lena and the captain, the hum of the equipment the only sound between them. Yates stepped closer, his voice lower now. "We thought Saber Shadow was gone." Lena leaned back in her chair, arms crossed loosely, eyes unreadable. "I was," she said evenly, "until you pulled me back in." Yates studied her for a long moment, the way one studies a puzzle that seems familiar but refuses to click into place. Finally, he exhaled. "This changes things." He didn't explain what things meant, didn't have to, because Lena already knew that somewhere, the recognition protocol that had greeted her was sending a signal, one she hadn't wanted to ever light up again. Outside the comms wing, the day went on as usual. Soldiers ran drills, trucks rumbled down supply lanes. Barrett griped to anyone who would listen about Ortiz getting special treatment. But Lena knew the quiet shift had already begun. The name wasn't just a glitch, wasn't just a quirk of an old machine. It was a call sign, and call signs had weight. Hers was heavier than most. It carried operations so far off the record they might as well have been myths, missions buried under layers of secrecy thick enough to suffocate the truth. And yet, here it was, alive again in a dusty console in a forgotten corner of the base. She finished her shift in silence, aware of Yates's occasional glance through his office window, aware of the whispers building at the edges of the room. By the time she stepped outside into the fading light, a black SUV with tinted windows had pulled up near the comms entrance, engine idling. She didn't have to ask who it was for. The black SUV door opened with the kind of precision that said whoever was inside was used to being obeyed, and out stepped two officers in full dress uniform, their ribbons catching the last threads of daylight like quiet warnings. The taller of the two, Colonel Arden, walked straight toward Lena without glancing at anyone else, his boots striking the pavement in a rhythm that made nearby soldiers stand a little straighter without realizing why. "Ms. Ortiz," he said, not as a question, but as confirmation, and before she could answer, he came to a crisp salute, one she hadn't received in almost a decade. She returned it slowly, almost reluctantly, and from the corner of her eye she saw Barrett lingering by the doorway, his confusion shifting into disbelief as whispers began darting from one set of lips to another. "We've been trying to locate Saber Shadow for years," Arden continued, his voice low enough to be for her alone. "Your signature just lit up the network. You understand what that means." Lena nodded once, the movement sharp but measured, and without another word, she climbed into the SUV. Inside, the hum of the engine was the only sound for a moment, until the officer beside her, Major Kell, set a slim black case on her lap. "You remember the protocols," he said simply. She opened the case and stared down at the tools of a life she'd locked away. A custom-coded terminal drive, a worn ID badge with no expiration date, and a single patch embroidered with the shadowed hawk insignia of a unit that officially didn't exist. Her thumb traced the edge of the patch, memories hitting in fragments, rooms without windows, lines of code that toppled regimes, the quiet click of a secure lock disengaging just before chaos broke loose half a world away. They drove to the far end of the base, where an underground facility waited behind blast doors, so heavy the ground seemed to vibrate when they opened. Inside, a command room glowed in blues and greens, screens tracking encrypted traffic across continents. Lena moved through it like muscle memory, ignoring the stares of the operators who'd been briefed only minutes before on who was walking among them. At the main console, she plugged in the drive, the system's lights flaring brighter as layers of security peeled back one by one until the deep core interface appeared, a place only Saber Shadow could reach. And there it was, a data breach in progress, running through the same channels she'd once used to dismantle enemy networks. Only now the source was hidden behind a cipher she'd designed herself. "This isn't random," she murmured, her fingers flying over the keys. "Someone's using my old ghost routes." Arden leaned in. "Can you stop them?" Lena didn't look up. "I can find them." The room held its breath as she traced the intrusion, each keystroke dragging the unknown closer into the light until a location blinked onto the map, coordinates deep in hostile territory. She locked it, tagged it, and pulled the plug. "Target neutralized," she said simply, standing back. No one applauded, but the silence shifted from curiosity to respect. Arden turned to the staff. "Log it. Operation Saber's return. Success." Barrett, who had somehow made his way to the back of the room, swallowed hard. Lena noticed him but said nothing, only walking past as Arden called after her. "Welcome home, Saber Shadow." She paused at the door, the hum of the servers in her ears, and looked over her shoulder. "I'm not here to stay," she said. "I'm here to make sure you remember what you've forgotten. Never underestimate the quiet ones." Then she was gone, disappearing into the corridor, leaving behind a room full of people who would never look at her, or anyone like her, the same way again.